The doll had always been part of my grandmother's house. It sat on a small wooden chair in the corner of her bedroom, facing the door. It had been there for as long as I could remember. No one was allowed to touch it, not to move it, not to place it anywhere else. When I was a child, I once asked why. My grandmother answered without hesitation, because it needs to stay where it can be seen. As I grew older, I noticed how seriously she took this. Every night before going to bed, she stopped in front of the doll. She never spoke. She never touched it. She only looked at it for a few seconds, then turned off the light and left the room. After my grandmother died, the house was emptied quickly. Furniture was taken, clothes were donated, most personal items were discarded. The doll was the last thing left. My mother didn't want to throw it away immediately. She said we would decide later. We placed it in a box and carried it to the basement. That night, I slept in the guest room. I woke up to a faint tapping sound. Not loud, not urgent, just light contact, like porcelain touching wood. I stayed still. The sound stopped. In the morning, my mother went to the basement to get something. She came back upstairs holding the box. It was still sealed. She said she felt uncomfortable keeping it in the house. That's when she told me about the storage unit. My grandmother had rented it for years. My mother said she never understood why. Nothing else had ever been stored there. So that afternoon, we took the box with the doll and drove it there ourselves. We unlocked the unit. Inside, it was empty. We placed the box in the center, closed it, and locked the door. That night, the house felt quieter. Too quiet. 2 days later, my mother suggested we check the unit again. She said she didn't like leaving things unfinished. When we arrived, the lock was still intact. Inside, the box was open. The doll was no longer inside it. It was sitting on a wooden chair that hadn't been there before, facing the door. My mother went very still. That's when she told me the truth. She said my grandmother used to move the doll between the house and the storage unit. Not often, only when it began to change. She never explained what that meant. She only said one thing. If it's being watched, it stays where it is. We didn't touch the doll. We left the storage unit exactly as it was. When we returned a week later, the unit was empty. The chair was gone. The doll was gone. The box was still there, closed. We canceled the rental the same day. The doll never returned to the house. But I now understand why my grandmother checked on it every night. Because watching it was never about keeping it close. It was about making sure it stayed still. A month later, I started noticing small stories in the local news. They weren't headlines, just short mentions. Incidents that didn't seem connected at first. A man found unresponsive in an apartment not far from the storage facility. Another case a few streets away. Then another. No details were ever given. The articles focused on confusion, disorientation, sudden changes in behavior. People described as calm, functional, and then suddenly not. What they all had in common was never mentioned, but my mother noticed it first. She said each report came from the same area, always close to places where things were stored, left behind, forgotten. We never told anyone about the doll. Weeks passed, then months. The stories stopped. The storage facility closed not long after. No explanation was given. The building still stands, but no one uses it. Sometimes when I think about the doll, I wonder if it was destroyed, or if it simply moved again. My grandmother never said the doll was dangerous. She only ever said it needed to be watched. And now that no one is watching it anymore, I try not to think about where it might be. I bought the doll at a small secondhand shop on the edge of town. I wasn't looking for anything special. I just needed a cheap birthday gift for my niece. The shop was cluttered and dim, the kind of place where you have to move boxes just to reach a shelf. Most of the toys were missing parts. The doll was the only thing that looked untouched. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't expensive. It was just clean. A porcelain face, glassy eyes, hair that was too neat for something that old. It wore a pale dress that looked handmade. The price tag was lower than it should have been. I asked the cashier if anything was wrong with it. She didn't answer right away. She glanced at the doll and then at me like she was deciding whether to speak. Finally, she said, "It was returned." That was all. I bought it anyway. When I got home, I left the doll in a bag by the door and forgot about it for a few hours. That night, my sister called to confirm the party time. I told her I had the gift and joked that it was an old-fashioned doll. She paused. "You didn't buy her something creepy, did you?" I laughed and said no. After the call, I took the doll out again and set it on the top shelf of my bookcase. I didn't want to wrap it yet. I just wanted it out of the way. It sat there facing the room. The next morning, it was still there. But it wasn't facing the room anymore. It was turned slightly toward the hallway, like someone had rotated it just enough to look past me. I assumed I had placed it wrong. I turned it back. The day after that, it happened again. Not a lot, just a small change, a few degrees, but always in the same direction, toward the hallway. I checked the shelf. It was flat. The doll was balanced properly. It couldn't roll or drift. It didn't wobble when I touched it. So I stopped thinking about it. A week later, I noticed something else. The doll's head was tilted as if it was listening. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I adjusted it. Straightened the head, turned it forward. Left for work. That night I came home late. The apartment was silent. I walked in, dropped my keys, and stood there for a second without turning the lights on. In the dark, the shape of the doll was still visible on the shelf. I don't know what made me look at it, but the doll was not facing the hallway. It was facing me, perfectly. I turned on the light and felt stupid immediately. Of course it was. I had probably placed it that way without thinking, or it had shifted when I pulled a book, or it was just my imagination in the dark. I turned it forward again and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to a sound that didn't fully register, a soft click, like porcelain touching wood. I sat up. The room was still dim. I didn't move. I listened. Nothing. I told myself it was the building, pipes, a neighbor, anything. When I finally got up, I noticed the doll was no longer on the top shelf. It was lower, not fallen, not broken, just moved down to the next shelf, sitting between my books like it had been placed there carefully. My stomach dropped in a way that didn't match what I was seeing, because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't violent, it was calm, like someone had taken their time. I picked it up and set it back on the top shelf. Then I did something I didn't want to admit I was doing. I tested it. I placed a thin strip of tape under the doll's base. Not enough to be visible, just enough that if the doll moved, the tape would shift or tear. That night, I slept badly. Not because I was scared, because I kept thinking about small movements, how easily you can be wrong, how easily your mind can create patterns. In the morning, the tape was torn, not peeled off, not loosened, torn cleanly, like something had been lifted and set down again, and the doll had turned. It wasn't looking toward the hallway, it wasn't looking toward me, it was looking toward the corner of the living room, where nothing was there. I stood in the doorway and stared at that corner for a long time. Then I did what most people do when something doesn't make sense. I tried to get rid of it. I put the doll back in its bag, tied it shut, and drove it to a donation bin across town. I didn't drop it at a shop. I didn't hand it to a person. I didn't want anyone to ask questions. I threw the bag into the bin and left. I felt relief immediately. That's the worst part. How fast relief arrives when you decide it's no longer your problem. That night, I slept better than I had in a week, until I woke up and saw the bag by my front door. The same bag, the same knot. There was no note, no sign anyone had been in my apartment. The lock wasn't damaged. The windows were closed. The bag sat upright, placed neatly against the wall like a delivery. I didn't open it right away. I stood there with my keys still in my hand, staring at the bag like it might move again if I looked away. I didn't bring the doll back inside. Instead, I called someone, a woman my co-worker had mentioned once. She described her as a spiritual advisor, though she never explained what that meant. I didn't believe in that kind of thing, but I also didn't know what else to do. I drove there that same afternoon. The woman didn't ask many questions. She told me to leave the bag on the floor and step back. She didn't touch it at first. She just looked at it for a long time. Then she asked one thing. "How long have you been putting it back?" I didn't answer right away. She nodded, like the silence was enough. She told me the doll wasn't attached to a place. It wasn't attached to a person either. She said it had learned something simpler. Consistency, being placed back, being corrected, being acknowledged. She told me I had done that repeatedly. I asked her what I was supposed to do. She said I wasn't supposed to do anything anymore. She took the bag from me and told me not to come back for it. I left without arguing. That night my apartment felt different. Not lighter, just quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. I didn't sleep well, but nothing moved. 2 weeks later, I ran into my coworker again and asked about the woman. She looked confused. She told me the woman had moved years ago. No forwarding address, no phone number. The building where I had taken the doll was still there, but the office was empty. I never saw the doll again. But sometimes when I wake up at night, I still check the top shelf, out of habit. The doll was already in the house when we moved in. It was sitting on a chair in my daughter's room, placed neatly against the wall. I assumed it belonged to the previous owners and planned to throw it out later. It didn't look dangerous. Just old, cloth body, porcelain face, button eyes. The kind of doll people used to give children decades ago. My daughter noticed it immediately. She asked if she could keep it. I said yes, mostly because I didn't see a reason not to. The doll stayed in the corner of her room, sitting upright, always facing the bed. At first, nothing happened. My daughter played normally. She talked to the doll the way children talk to toys, made up conversations, gave it a name. None of that worried me. What worried me was when the conversation stopped sounding imaginary. One night while I was standing outside her room, I heard her speaking quietly, not laughing, not pretending, just talking. I listened for a moment before knocking. I heard her ask a question, then she paused, and then she nodded, like someone had answered. I opened the door. She was sitting on her bed. The doll was still in the chair. I asked her who she was talking to. She looked confused and said, "Her." I told her dolls don't talk. She said, "She doesn't talk like people. She answers." I asked what that meant. She said, "She doesn't use her mouth." I laughed it off. I told myself it was imagination. Kids explain things badly. That's normal. But over the next few days, I noticed changes. My daughter stopped asking the doll questions out loud. She would sit quietly, stare at it, and then respond softly. Sometimes she would shake her head. Sometimes she would whisper, "No." I asked her what the doll was saying. She told me the doll didn't like when people listened. That was the first time I felt uncomfortable. A few nights later, I woke up to my daughter standing in the hallway. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was just standing there holding the doll. I asked her what she was doing. She said she wanted to sleep closer. I took the doll from her and put it back in the chair. I walked my daughter back to bed and stayed until she fell asleep. The next morning, the doll was back beside her bed. I hadn't moved it there. That's when I decided the doll needed to go. I told my daughter we were giving it away. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just said, "She said that would happen." I didn't ask what she meant. I put the doll in a box and stored it in the garage. That night, my daughter slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The following morning, the box was open. The doll was gone. I found it sitting on the chair in my daughter's room, facing the bed. I didn't touch it. I called my sister and asked her to come over. I didn't explain everything. I just said something was wrong. When she arrived, I asked her to look at the doll. She said it was creepy and asked why we kept it. Before I could answer, my daughter spoke from behind us. She says you don't hear her because you don't listen the right way. My sister laughed nervously. Then she stopped laughing. She asked my daughter what the doll had just said. My daughter looked at the doll and then back at us. She says you shouldn't have come today. That night, my sister left early. I packed the doll into the car and drove it to a landfill outside the city. I threw it into a container meant for broken furniture and toys. I didn't look back. When I returned home, my daughter was asleep. The chair in her room was empty. I thought it was over. A week later, my daughter asked me a question while we were eating dinner. She asked if people could hear things without ears. I asked her why. She said because she's quiet now. I asked who. She looked at the empty chair and said she doesn't need to answer anymore. We moved out of that house 2 months later. The doll was never seen again, but my daughter still avoids empty chairs. And sometimes late at night, I hear her whisper, "No," into the darkness, like she's responding to something that already knows the answer.